Hello again. We're in Christianity and the Social Crisis by Walter Rauschenbusch on page 57 in the chapter The Social Aims of Jesus. Just backing up a bit, he's been discussing the nature of the kingdom according to the Jewish understanding in the days when John and then Jesus preached this kingdom of God. He says, whatever aspect any man emphasized, it was still a national and collective idea. It involved the restoration of Israel as a nation to outward independence, security, and power, such as it had had under the Davidic kings. It involved that social justice, prosperity, and happiness for which the law and the prophets called, and for which the common people always longed. It involved that religious purity and holiness of which the nation had always fallen short. And all this was to come in an ideal degree, such as God alone, by direct intervention, could bestow. When Jesus used the phrase, the kingdom of God, it inevitably evoked that whole sphere of thought in the minds of his hearers. If he did not mean by it the substance of what they meant by it, it was a mistake to use the term. If he did not mean the consummation of the theocratic hope, but merely an internal blessedness for individuals with the hope of getting to heaven, why did he use the words around which all the collective hopes clustered? In that case, it was not only a misleading, but a dangerous phrase. It unfettered the political hopes of the crowd. It drew down on him the suspicion of the government. It actually led to his death. Unless we have clear proof to the contrary, we must assume that in the main, the words meant the same thing to him and to his audiences. But it is very possible that he seriously modified and corrected the popular conception. That is, in fact, the process with every great creative religious mind. The connection with the past is maintained, and the old terms are used, but they are set in new connections and filled with new qualities. In the teaching of Jesus, we find that he consciously opposed some features of the popular hope and sought to make it truer. For one thing, he would have nothing to do with bloodshed and violence. When the crowds that were on their way to the Passover gathered around him in the solitude on the eastern shore of the lake and wanted to make him king and march on the capital, he eluded them by sending his inflammable disciples away in the boat and himself going up among the rocks to pray, so the darkness dispersed the crowd. Alliance with the messianic force revolution was one of the temptations which he confronted at the outset and repudiated. He would not set up God's kingdom by using the devil's means of hatred and blood. With the glorious idealism of faith and love, Jesus threw away the sword and advanced on the entrenchments of wrong with hand outstretched and heart exposed. He repudiated not only human violence, he even put aside the force which the common hope expected from heaven. He refused to summon the 12 legions of angels, either to save his life or to set up the kingdom by slaying the wicked. John the Baptist had expected the activity of the Messiah to begin with the judgment. The fruitless tree would be hewn down, the chaff would be winnowed out and burned, and there was barely time to escape this. Jesus felt no call to that sort of messiahship. He reversed the program. The judgment would come at the end and not at the beginning. First the blade, then the ear, and then the full corn in the ear. And at the very last, the harvest. Only at the end would the tares be collected. Only when the net got to shore would the good fish be separated from the useless creatures of the sea. Thus the divine finale of the judgment was relegated to the distance. The only task calling for present action was to sow the seed. Now linked to some videos we've shot, a series of them, I think at least 4, on the wheat and the weeds, the sower parable and the parable of the wheat and the weeds. The first 2 parables in Matthew 13. Did Christ foretell a universal apostasy of the church?